Well, we're back for one last time. It's been quite fun making these videos. I'm gonna have to find something new to do afterwards. For now, though, we still have one more movie to look at. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, which might just be my favorite of the movies, this or Azkaban. As I mentioned in my video on Part 1, I think the split greatly benefited this movie. By getting pretty much the whole quest for the Horcruxes out of the way in Part 1, this movie was able to focus almost entirely on the final battle, and boy did they do it justice. This movie also had to adapt some of the strongest and most important material from the books. Most of it was done great, but some of it not so much. Let's dive in for the last time. The movie opens where the last one left off, with Voldemort acquiring the Elder Wand. We are then shown some foreboding shots of the now Death Eater-controlled Hogwarts surrounded by Dementors with Snape in charge, accompanied by suitably beautiful yet haunting music. We are then shown Shell Cottage, where the group are currently staying with Bill and Fleur. Dobby's grave, now with its new headstone, and Harry sitting next to it contemplating the mirror fragment in which he sees what appears to be Dumbledore. This whole opening montage is a really good way to start the movie, I think. It refreshes us on what happened in Part 1 and some of the plot points that will come into play in this movie, and gives us a bit of foreshadowing on what's to come. We then get a brief introduction to Shell Cottage, where the group are currently staying, and feels like a pretty pleasant and safe place. Obviously, the trio have to keep moving, but it's nice to at least have a bit of peace at the start of the movie. Now, to rewind just a little, something I didn't address in my last video, because it felt more appropriate to mention it in this one, is that as Harry was digging Dobby's grave, he was also doing a lot of thinking. Dobby's death lit a spark in him, causing him to both figure a lot of things out and sort out his own priorities. The writing is deliberately vague, however, so as not to tell us, the readers, what he has figured out until he talks to Ron and Hermione about it. Harry goes back into the cottage, where Bill informs him that their family have been moved from the Burrow to their great Aunt Muriel's house. Now that the Death Eaters know Ron's with Harry and not sick at home with Spattergroit, it isn't safe to leave them there. The house has been placed under the Fidelius charm with Mr. Weasley as the secret keeper, and so has this house with Bill as the secret keeper. Harry then does a lot of thinking, trying to make up his mind about things, realizing that Dumbledore understood Ron as he gave him the Deluminator, as well as Wormtail, as he knew there was some remorse in him. So what did Dumbledore understand about Harry? As he's thinking about this, he feels his scar prickle and knows Voldemort is figuring out where the Elder Wand is. Remember, unlike in the movie, Grindelwald didn't tell him, so he hasn't actually found it yet, but he's starting to figure it out on his own now. So Harry goes to Bill and tells him he needs to talk to Ollivander and Griphook, and his voice is described as being full of authority and conviction. As I said, Dobby's death lit a fire in him, and now he's taking charge in a way he hadn't before. He decides to talk to Griphook first, and while it may not seem like it in the movie, this is actually a very big decision for him. Remember that in the book, after learning about the Deathly Hallows, Harry had become obsessed with finding them, despite both Ron and Hermione trying to steer him away from that. But now, following Dobby's death, that has all changed. Harry sees things more clearly. Ollivander can give him info on one of the Deathly Hallows, the Elder Wand, while Griphook can give him info on a potential Horcrux. So Harry's deciding to talk to Griphook first is him making the choice to prioritize the Horcruxes over the Hallows. He knows Voldemort is realizing where the Elder Wand is, but that he could still be able to get there first if he wanted. And he doesn't. He turns his back on the Elder Wand to do the task that he was assigned, even in spite of all the doubts he's had about Dumbledore. It's a huge moment for his character, and a choice that will pay off heavily in the end. Unfortunately, we don't feel the weight of that decision in the movie, as the movie never showed Harry's struggle or desire for the Hallows, so his big arc is pretty much non-existent. I've already talked about that in the last video, though. So Harry goes to talk to Griphook, and I love this response Griphook gives him.
How are you? Alive.
Yeah, I've definitely felt that way sometimes. In this movie and the last one, Griphook is played by Warwick Davis, making this his second character on the show. In his brief appearance in Philosopher's Stone, he was played by Vern Troyer. However, by the time Deathly Hallows was made, they had decided to use strictly British actors, so Davis took over the role. He plays it well, so I have no complaints. This scene is kind of a combination of a couple different scenes in the book, which I don't mind too much. It makes sense that they want to get things moving towards the final Hogwarts battle as quickly as possible. Because of that, a lot of the downtime at Shell Cottage was cut. Harry, having figured out from Bellatrix's behavior back at the manor that there's a Horcrux in her vault, wants Griphook's help to break into it. In the book, he just kind of blurts it out, which is funny, but I like the way he carefully approaches it in the movie. Now, in the book, they don't make a deal just yet. Griphook simply says he'll think about it, and it's in a later scene that he proposes the exchange of the sword. I suppose I might as well mention that Griphook in the movie comes across more calm and reasonable than in the book. I don't really mind this for the scene itself. They don't really have time to go deep into the animosity between goblins and wizards. It does, however, make his later betrayal seem a little out of nowhere. In the book, however, things are a bit rocky between them from the get-go. Griphook brings up the mistreatment of other beings at the hands of wizards, which is a fair point, and as I mentioned in the past, is part of the reason so many other races, like giants and werewolves, have sided with Voldemort rather than the Ministry, who have oppressed them for so long. The goblins have suffered mistreatment as well, but being generally very clever, they, unlike those other races, saw through Voldemort's lies and didn't side with him either, remaining firmly neutral. Griphook does seem to have a degree of respect for Harry due to Harry rescuing him, and the respect Harry showed to a house elf by burying him without magic. I'm not trying to get myself any treasure. I'm not trying to take anything for personal gain. Can you believe that? If there was a wizard of whom I would believe that they did not seek personal gain, it would be you, Harry Potter. Goblins and elves are not used to the protection or the respect that you have shown this night. Not from wand carriers. That said, he still views wizards in general as very untrustworthy and greedy. He even gets into an argument with Ron here when he brings up the fact that non-human creatures aren't allowed to use wands. Again, a valid point, and maybe a law that should be changed. Ron argues that goblins won't share their own magic either. Goblins are masters at metalworking. Their craftsmanship is unmatched by anything wizards can make, and they won't share their techniques, just as wizards won't share wand magic. As Griphook goes on about how no one seems to care about the goblins and house elves suffering under Voldemort's rule, Hermione has a pretty cool moment where she speaks up. I'm hunted quite as much as any goblin or elf, Griphook. I'm a mudblood. Don't call yourself... Why shouldn't I? Mudblood, and proud of it. I've got no higher position under this new order than you have, Griphook. It was me they chose to torture back at the Malfoys. Even Griphook seems somewhat impressed by this, yet even so doesn't immediately agree to help them. As Ron says after they leave, it seems like he enjoys leaving them hanging. In addition, as the trio leave the room, Harry takes the sword with him, which Griphook clearly doesn't like. Now before I move on, I do want to address something in the movie version of this scene. Griphook explains to the trio about the fake sword in Bellatrix's vault and that Snape put it there. Remember, this is something the trio overheard Griphook talk about a long time ago in the book, and is what ultimately led them to realizing the sword can destroy Horcruxes. Here, it's basically used as an explanation as to why Bellatrix thought the sword should have been in her vault. Which, fair enough. My only issue is that Ron questions why Snape would put a fake sword in Bellatrix's vault, which I feel hints a little too much that things with Snape aren't entirely as they seem. In the book, when they overheard Griphook talk about this, it was implied that Snape simply didn't know it was a fake. After leaving Griphook, Harry explains his theory about there being a Horcrux in the Lestrange's vault. Ron is confused, seeing as that doesn't seem like a place of importance to Voldemort, but as Harry says, I think he would have envied anyone who had a key to a Gringotts vault. I think he'd have seen it as a real symbol of belonging to the wizarding world. Of course, he didn't tell Bellatrix it was a Horcrux. Despite her fanatical devotion to him, she means no more to him than anyone else. So the trio go to see Ollivander to ask him some questions. I'm really glad they were able to get John Hurt back for this part. His performance elevates every scene he's in. In the book, Harry starts by showing Ollivander his broken wand and asking if it can be fixed, but Ollivander says that unfortunately he knows of no way to repair a wand that has suffered this much damage. He then presents Ollivander with the 3 wands they took from the Malfoy Manor. We only see 2 of them in the movie. He identifies Bellatrix's wand and Draco's wand, which he claims has changed its allegiance to Harry.
I sense its allegiance has changed.
You talk about wands as if they have feelings, can think.
The wand chooses the wizard, Mr. Potter.
I just love hearing him say this line in exactly the same way 7 films later. Unfortunately, he doesn't go into any more detail than that in the movie. In the book, he explains more about the bond between the wizard and the wand, and that while any wizard can use any wand, the best results will always come when there's the strongest connection between them. These connections are varied and depend on the wand and wizard in question, but as a general rule, a wand's allegiance will change when its owner has been defeated or disarmed. As such, by disarming Draco, Harry has won the allegiance of his wand, and Ron, by disarming Pettigrew, has won the allegiance of his wand. This is the 3rd wand Ollivander identifies that they didn't show in the movie. These rules regarding wand ownership will turn out to be very important in the end, so I do think the movie should have explained it more. And as I mentioned in the last video, even in the book, I think this concept should have been established earlier than the last book. And speaking of the book, even there are a couple things that I think should have been explained more. Instead, Rowling had to explain it herself after the fact. While a wand's allegiance will change after it has been won, it does still hold some affinity for its old owner and will still work fairly well for them. The one exception to this is the Elder Wand, which is completely unsentimental, and its allegiance is entirely to its current owner, not retaining any allegiance to its old ones. In addition, unlike other wands, the Elder Wand will sense when its owner has been disarmed, even if the Elder Wand wasn't the one that was taken from them, and shift its allegiance accordingly. Honestly, until Rowling explained these things, I thought this created a plot hole, as we had seen several people being disarmed throughout the series without the wand seemingly changing allegiances. This explanation answers those questions, though, and should have been in the book. Harry then asks Ollivander about the things Voldemort questioned him about, including why Harry's wand acted on its own against him when he was fleeing Privet Drive, something even Ollivander has no explanation for, and of course the Elder Wand. Unlike in the movie, Harry only asks Ollivander about what he knows about the Deathly Hallows at the end of the questioning, and also unlike in the movie, Ollivander has never heard of them. The Elder Wand was the only one he was aware of. Having him know about the others in the movie does make sense, though, to refresh our memories in case we've forgotten since the last one. Not knowing about the connection between Harry and Voldemort, Ollivander in the book is naturally shocked and terrified that Harry seems to know everything Voldemort questioned him about. Hermione, likewise, is shocked to learn that the Elder Wand truly is real. She had been stubbornly refusing to believe it all this time. Ollivander admits that he told Voldemort under torture to go to Gregorovitch for the Elder Wand, based on rumors that had been going around for ages. Rumors Gregorovitch himself started to drum up interest and make better business. He talks about how Voldemort believes the Elder Wand will make him truly invincible, and that while it may not be entirely true, it would still be a formidable combination.
He's after you, Mr. Potter. If it's true, what you say, and he has the Elder Wand, I'm afraid you really don't stand a chance.
Well, I suppose I'll have to kill him before he finds me then.
In the book, Harry then leads Ron and Hermione out into the garden and explains everything to them. Grindelwald stole the Elder Wand from Gregorovitch and used it to rise to power. When Dumbledore defeated him, he took the Elder Wand, and now the Elder Wand is lying with him in his crypt. Upon hearing this, Ron wants to go get it, but Harry refuses. Like Hermione said, Dumbledore didn't want him to have it. He wanted him to find the Horcruxes. During all of this, the questioning of Griphook and Ollivander, and explaining all of this to Ron and Hermione, Harry's scar has been hurting, and he's been seeing glimpses of Voldemort's point of view, but resisting them. Now, however, he gives in and watches as Voldemort goes to Dumbledore's grave and takes the Elder Wand for himself. Now, the movie cuts the rest of the trio's stay at Shell Cottage and goes right to them leaving for Gringotts. Again, this is understandable, as the filmmakers want to get to the final battle quickly. Some of the things that were cut, though, do add more context to Griphook's decisions. Due to his internal narration, we see that Harry is now having serious doubts about his decision not to go after the Elder Wand. He chose his path, but that doesn't mean he's not going to second-guess himself, especially given the weight of that decision. As is noted, it's the first time he's made the decision not to act. Ron keeps voicing the same doubts Harry's having, which only makes it worse. Hermione, on the other hand, supports his decision. Now that she's been forced to accept that the Elder Wand is real, she maintains that it's an evil object. Hermione's support doesn't make Harry feel any better, though, as he continues to question whether he misunderstood Dumbledore's intentions. Speaking of Dumbledore, Ron brings up the possibility that he may be alive. Between them being given the sword, which as far as they know, Dumbledore had last, and Harry seeing his eye in the mirror, Ron seems to think it's a strong possibility, though it's most likely wishful thinking, like with Moody. Fleur approaches Harry, telling him that Griphook wants to see him. The trio go to Griphook, who agrees to help them get into the vault in exchange for the Sword of Gryffindor. Now, in the movie, it's never really explained what his interest in the sword is, but the book goes into that here. Since they need the sword to destroy the Horcruxes, the trio initially refuse the deal, and Ron suggests he simply take what he wants from the Lestrange's vault once they get in. This angers Griphook, as it implies he's some sort of thief. The sword, he says, is rightfully Goblin property. According to him, Godric Gryffindor stole the sword from the Goblin who forged it. This naturally surprises the trio, even Hermione, who never read anything about that. The true reason for this statement, however, is due to a difference in how humans and goblins view the concept of ownership, as Bill explains to Harry later. The way goblins see it, the maker of an object is always the true owner of it, and buying something is more akin to renting. As such, goblins largely think of wizards as thieves who have no respect for their property as they pass goblin-made products between each other, when according to the goblins, the object should have been returned to its maker after the first buyer had finished with it. Or at the very least, further payment should have been made to the maker as it changed hands. This difference of opinion in what ownership means has been the source of many conflicts between wizards and goblins in history, as goblins have started wars for the purpose of taking back objects they believe to be rightfully theirs. As such, this is why Griphook wants the sword. According to him, it's goblin property and the trio have no right to it. This disagreement and the historical distrust between goblins and wizards in general further indicates that the alliance between the trio and Griphook is tenuous at best. The trio leave the room to talk things over before they agree to the deal. Ron suggests switching out the sword with the fake one in the vault and running before Griphook realizes he's been hoodwinked. Hermione shoots this down on moral grounds, though.
That is despicable. Ask for his help, then double-cross him? And you wonder why goblins don't like wizards, Ron.
Ultimately, they decide to agree to Griphook's deal, but are careful to avoid telling him exactly when he can have the sword. That way they can continue using the sword to destroy Horcruxes, but still keep their word in the end. So the trio and Griphook spend weeks shut in a bathroom, planning their break-in, only coming out for mealtimes, something the other inhabitants of the cottage take notice of. Griphook's behavior during this time greatly unsettles the trio, further hinting that he is not to be trusted. The longer they spent together, the more Harry realized he did not much like the goblin. Griphook was unexpectedly bloodthirsty, laughed at the idea of pain in lesser creatures, and seemed to relish the possibility that they might have to hurt other wizards to reach the Lestrange's vault. Harry could tell that his distaste was shared by the other two, but they did not discuss it. They needed Griphook. Having to accommodate Griphook makes things difficult for Fleur, and Harry goes to her to apologize, but she reminds him that he saved her sister from the lake, and she hasn't forgotten that. Harry decides not to remind her that her sister was never in any actual danger. When Harry tells her that he, Ron, Hermione, and Griphook will be off their hands soon, Fleur actually starts getting a little protective and insists that they can't leave here. She and Mrs. Weasley have more in common than either of them would care to admit. Bill brings Mr. Ollivander down to take him to his great Aunt Muriel's house, since there's more space there, and we get this really sweet goodbye between him and Luna.
I'm going to miss you, Mr. Ollivander.
And I you, my dear. You were an inexpressible comfort to me in that terrible place.
Fleur then asks Ollivander to return Muriel's tiara to her, which Fleur had borrowed at the wedding and never had a chance to return. Griphook notices the tiara changing hands and clearly disapproves, seeing as it was made by goblins. So, while most of the Shell Cottage stuff I think was pretty cuttable, there is one part that I think should have been kept in. Lupin arrives at the cottage and announces that Tonks has had the baby. It's a boy, and they've named him Ted after Tonks' father. On top of that, Lupin names Harry as Teddy's godfather. I think this is a really important moment, as there's been so much death in this book. Hearing about a new life being born gives everyone more hope, and one more thing to fight for. Sadly, we don't learn about this in the movie. Harry just suddenly brings up Lupin's son at the end, even though there's been no sign or mention of him until then. On top of that, aside from hearing his voice on the radio, this is the first time Harry's seen Lupin since their meeting at Grimmauld Place, which, as you may remember, didn't exactly end on the friendliest of notes. It seems Lupin has not only forgiven Harry for what he said, but followed his advice and embraced his new family. After Lupin leaves, Bill takes Harry aside to talk to him. He's noticed that Harry's been spending a lot of time with Griphook and knows they're planning something together. Having worked at Gringotts for quite a while, Bill knows how goblins think, and so he tells Harry about the goblins' different concept of ownership, and that if Harry's made any sort of deal with Griphook, he needs to be very careful not to break it. There is a deleted scene where Bill talks a bit about this.
Listen, I know goblins. If you struck any kind of bargain with Griphook, you must be exceptionally careful to live up to it. If you don't, he won't be forgiving.
Harry is left feeling uneasy after this and has this somewhat amusing thought. As he followed Bill back to the others, a wry thought came to him, born no doubt of the wine he had drunk. He seemed set on course to become just as reckless a godfather to Teddy Lupin as Sirius Black had been to him. The day before their attempted break-in, as the trio discussed their plan, we learn that Harry and Ron have been producing pretty good results with Draco and Pettigrew's wands respectively. But Hermione isn't getting such good results from Bellatrix's because unlike them, she didn't win its allegiance by taking it directly from its owner. We also see that Griphook has been barely leaving them alone. Clearly he doesn't trust them with the sword. "You could give my mom lessons," growled Ron as the goblin's long fingers kept appearing around the edges of doors. The next morning, Harry and Ron leave and meet up with Griphook and Hermione, now disguised as Bellatrix. I know I've talked about how great Helena Bonham Carter is as Bellatrix, but honestly, her best acting, in my opinion, is when she's playing Hermione.
Well, how do I look? No, he's right. I was being stupid.
And not only that, she has to play Hermione pretending to be Bellatrix. Much like in Face Off, where Nicolas Cage had to try to play Nicolas Cage. Here, Helena Bonham Carter has to try to play Helena Bonham Carter. And she plays both Hermione and herself pretty much perfectly. The movie doesn't really explain this, but that was the last of their Polyjuice potion, so Hermione had to use Transfiguration to alter Ron's appearance. Harry and Griphook, meanwhile, will be under the invisibility cloak. They go to Diagon Alley, and in both versions, we see that Hermione really struggles to be Bellatrix, as she acts way too nice.
Good morning. You Bellatrix Lestrange, not some dewy-eyed schoolgirl.
Unfortunately, in the book, after Hermione realizes she needs to treat people like dirt, the next person they encounter is the Death Eater, Travers. Travers is surprised to see her there, as the residents of Malfoy Manor were all confined to the house after letting the prisoners escape, but Hermione manages to smooth it over.
The Dark Lord forgives those of us who have served him most faithfully in the past. Perhaps your credit is not as good with him as mine is, Travers.
She also brushes off Travers' claim that he heard she had lost her wand as nothing more than rumors. She then introduces Ron to Travers as Dragomir Despard from Transylvania, claiming that he's sympathetic to the Dark Lord's ideals, though speaks very little English. Unfortunately for them, it turns out Travers is going to Gringotts as well and decides to accompany Bellatrix. There is also a rather heartbreaking moment in the book before they meet Travers, where a man runs up to Hermione demanding to know where his children are. Ron is forced to stun him to protect Hermione. So the group reach the bank and find two wizards using probity probes to scan the people entering for signs of concealment. After Travers passes through, Harry uses a Confundus charm on the two of them to make them think they've already scanned Hermione/Bellatrix, and she and Ron make it past them. After Travers presents his key to the goblin at the desk, he hangs back to wait for Bellatrix. This part plays out more or less the same in the movie, as the goblins seem to suspect something is off, but Harry uses the Imperius Curse on the goblin talking to them, Bogrod, to make him cooperate. In the book, he ends up having to use it on Travers as well, and so the goblins wouldn't get suspicious, orders Travers to come with them. Upon entering the cavern, Harry takes off the invisibility cloak, since the only two witnesses now are Travers and Bogrod, who are both Imperiist. He orders Travers to go hide, and Bogrod to steer the cart for them. In the movie, Griphook seems to be steering the cart, but as he says in the book, he no longer has the authority to do so, hence why they need Bogrod. In both versions, they run into what Griphook calls the Thieves' Downfall, which washes away all of their enchantments.
Oh no, you look like you again.
Fortunately, they manage to place Bogrod back under the Imperius Curse, and he and Griphook lead the trio to the Lestrange's Vault, where they find a chained-up dragon guarding it. A Ukrainian Ironbelly, according to Ron in the movie. In both versions, they get past it by shaking these objects called clankers.
It's been trained to expect pain when it hears the noise.
That's barbaric.
I don't mind them adding that last line from Hermione because, well, it is barbaric. But this will sort of tie into a problem I have a bit later. They have Bogrod touch the vault, and they go inside. In both versions, they find that the things they touch multiply into worthless copies, but in the book, they also become super hot, making it all the more essential that they don't touch anything. So rather than running up the ever-expanding pile of treasure like in the movie, Hermione uses Levicorpus on Harry so he can reach the cup. Unfortunately, this doesn't stop him from hitting some of the treasure, and they end up in a deluge of scalding hot metal regardless. One other thing, in the movie, Harry seems to recognize the Horcrux thanks to the connection between him and Voldemort. This never happens with the Horcruxes in the book. He simply recognizes the Hufflepuff cup from the memories Dumbledore showed him in Half-Blood Prince. So once Griphook has the sword, he promptly betrays them.
I said I'd get you in. I didn't say anything about getting you out.
And he cries out to the other goblins that thieves have broken in. Again, at least for me, this betrayal was better foreshadowed in the book, as Griphook was portrayed as clearly untrustworthy from the beginning. The trio were quickly set upon by an approaching horde of goblins and wizard guards, though Bogrod being roasted by the dragon did not happen in the book. Speaking of which, Harry, looking at the dragon, comes up with one of his signature reckless ideas. The tethered dragon let out a roar and a gush of flame flew over the goblins. The wizards fled doubled up back the way they had come, and inspiration, or madness, came to Harry. Yeah, that's right. Harry's idea.
We can't just stand here. You've got an idea.
Sure, the brilliant one.
I've got something, but it's mad.
Yet again, Hermione steals a cool moment from one of the other two in the movie. I've been trying to justify these moments whenever I can, but this is one that I just can't. Hermione is the smartest of the three and the best at magic on a technical level, but when it comes to just raw survival instincts, Harry has her beat. I think the whole argument about the Deathly Hallows earlier in the book highlights both Hermione's flaws and strengths. It shows her closed-mindedness, inflexibility, and that she has trouble thinking outside the box. But it also shows her ability to focus on a task and see it through, regardless of any distractions. She's great at coming up with long-term plans, knows all the spells, and is the best at using them. But as we see several times, she's also the most prone to panicking under pressure. Harry, on the other hand, is kind of the opposite. When there's no pressure, he tends to procrastinate. But when he is under pressure, he really shines. He has a talent for coming up with insane, reckless ideas in the heat of the moment, which nearly always work. Like hopping on a dragon to escape an oncoming horde of goblins and wizards. On top of that, Hermione hates flying, so there's no way she would come up with this idea. Harry, on the other hand, loves flying. It's the thing he excels at more than anything. So of course he's the one that would come up with something like this. And I think the worst part is, I see no good reason for this change. It's not like it would have made the movie longer if Harry had been the one to come up with this. So why change it? Like I said, I usually try to find some justification for these moments Hermione steals from Harry or Ron, but I just can't think of any for this one. It just seems like favoritism. And unfortunately, this favoritism makes Hermione seem more like the protagonist and makes Harry seem way too passive. I saw a comment somewhere that said something like this. In the books, Harry, Ron, and Hermione each have their own strengths and weaknesses that balance each other out, and when they work together, they're the perfect team. In the movies, Harry is the bland protagonist who is carried by Hermione, who is the smart, strong, independent woman, and Ron is the clown. While I do think this is a bit harsh, I don't disagree with the core of it. But moving on, aside from it being Hermione's idea, I think this scene as a whole was done really well. I really felt for the dragon when it was finally free from its long captivity. The trio ride the dragon for a good while until it eventually gets low enough over a lake and they jump off. In the book, after climbing ashore, Harry casts the usual protective enchantments around them and Hermione applies Dittany to all of their burn wounds from the heated treasure. They successfully got the Horcrux, but now they have nothing to destroy it with. The trio actually have a moment here where they all burst out laughing. This is nice. They've just gotten out of a situation that they saw no way out of, so they get to be a little lightheaded for a moment. Harry then has a vision of Voldemort learning about the theft of the cup. A terrified goblin reports it to him, and in his rage and horror, he kills everyone in the room who doesn't manage to get away. He now knows that Harry is after the Horcruxes and is worried about the safety of the others, thinking about each of them and where he had hidden it, including the one at Hogwarts, the only one Harry didn't know the location of yet. He decides to keep Nagini close to him from now on and to send a message to Snape informing him that Harry might try and get into Hogwarts. Meanwhile, he decides to check on the other Horcruxes to make sure they're safe. This scene is different in the movie. First of all, Harry has the vision while still underwater, but that's irrelevant. Harry also sees a vision of Rowena Ravenclaw, though how he knows that's who it is, I don't know. And the symbol of Ravenclaw House, or at least the movie version of it, it's supposed to be an eagle, not a raven. In the movie, this is how he knows the Horcrux is connected to Ravenclaw, since Dumbledore never suggested in the Half-Blood Prince film that one of them might be. It also comes across in the movie like Voldemort knows which Horcruxes have already been destroyed, and in fact we see later that he actually does feel it when one of them is. This is not the case in the book, where Voldemort doesn't feel it at all and had no idea the Horcruxes were even in danger until this very moment. The only Horcrux he knows has been destroyed is the diary. This may be a slight plot hole in the movie, as the only reason Voldemort didn't make for Hogwarts right away in the book was so he could check on all the other Horcruxes first. And one more thing, it's shown later on that one of the goblins Voldemort killed was Griphook. We even see the sword vanish from his hand. It's never mentioned in the book that Griphook was killed, and honestly I kind of prefer that, mainly because I like to imagine the look on his face when the sword disappeared. Incidentally, I do like this little scene of Voldemort talking to Nagini while the Malfoys watch horrified at the death and carnage around him. You can just tell even they don't want to be part of this anymore. So Harry immediately tells the others what he's seen, and now there's no option for them to stop and rest. They decide to apparate into Hogsmeade and find a way to get into the castle from there. Hermione initially protests the idea of going there without a plan, but as Harry points out, they don't have time. They have to get into Hogwarts and find the Horcrux before Voldemort gets back there. I do love Harry's response to her in the movie.
We've got to plan, we've got to figure it out.
Hermione, when have any of our plans ever actually worked? We plan, we get there, all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, that pretty much sums it up.